And I
Yeah.
think, remember in part 4 how we explored the power of prayer? Well,
Oh,
this
yeah.
time things get even more complex as we examine how faith intersects with power dynamics and historical claims.
Yeah, I mean, and that's where, things can get really controversial
Oh, absolutely.
because you're dealing with, people's deeply held beliefs and you're also dealing with, history and interpretation.
Yeah, interpretations.
And, all of these things can be very subjective.
Right. And, one comment from at Muck
Mhm.
really sparked my curiosity
Mhm.
because they use the conflict in Palestine as a jumping off point to question the validity of religious claims,
Okay.
especially those rooted in ancient texts and the idea of unseen deities.
Right.
They're particularly skeptical of the Hebrew claim to Palestine based on a promise from what they call a sky god from 2,000 years ago.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a perspective we hear a lot, this idea that religious claims based on events from so long ago just shouldn't hold weight in the modern world.
Right.
And it's definitely a valid point to consider. I mean, how do we reconcile these ancient beliefs with the realities of today,
Exactly.
especially in areas that are marked by conflict and violence?
Right. Like how much weight do those ancient promises hold, you know,
Right.
in the face of all these present day complexities?
Yeah, and that's where I think at Light of Reflection jumps into the conversation with a really interesting response.
Yeah.
Because instead of dismissing at Muck's skepticism, outright, they use it as a springboard to explore this idea that many religions today have strayed from their original purity.
Oh, that's interesting. So they're not denying that religious beliefs can be misused or distorted,
Right.
but they're saying that there's like a deeper, more authentic core that's been kind of lost or corrupted.
Exactly. And to get to that core, to separate what they see as genuine divine guidance from human manipulation,
Mhm.
they present this 9-step test for identifying the true path.
Okay, a 9-step test. I'm intrigued already.
It's a framework that emphasizes things like continuity from the very beginning of the religion,
Okay.
the presence of miracles and fulfilled prophecies, texts that have remained unchanged, over time,
Hmm.
and this idea of divinely appointed leaders or custodians who ensure the correct interpretation of those texts.
Okay, wait, hold on. Divinely appointed leaders.
Yes.
Doesn't that go against the idea of individual interpretation and free will?
That's a great question, and it's one that goes right to the heart of the debate between faith and reason.
Yeah.
How much room is there for individual interpretation when you're dealing with a belief system that claims to have the single divinely ordained truth?
Right, like who gets to decide what that truth is?
Exactly. And that's a tension that we're going to be exploring throughout this deep dive.
Okay, I'm ready to
Yes.
do it.
Right.
Yeah, it definitely raises some eyebrows. Like, on the one hand, you've got at Muck, arguing against this whole idea of any single true path,
Right.
especially one based on ancient claims.
Right.
And then on the other, you've got at Light of Reflection saying, well, no, there is a true path.
Uh-huh.
But it hinges on this very specific set of criteria, including these divinely appointed leaders. It's fascinating.
It is. And to understand at Light of Reflection's argument a little bit better, I think we need to kind of unpack these 9 steps.
Yeah, break it down for us. What are the key elements of this true path test?
So they start by emphasizing continuity. They argue that a true faith should have a clear, unbroken line of transmission from its founder to the present day.
Okay, so like a chain, each link representing a generation passing down the teachings?
Exactly. No broken links, no missing pieces, in the historical puzzle.
Gotcha.
And then there's this whole question of miracles.
Okay.
At Light of Reflection believes that true prophets and divine messengers should be accompanied by events that defy natural laws.
So like supernatural proof, a divine stamp of approval.
Precisely. And they extend this idea to the sacred texts themselves.
Okay.
They argue that these texts should have remained unchanged over time, preserved in their original form.
So like a perfectly preserved time capsule containing the unadulterated word of God.
Yes. And to add another layer, they believe that these texts should also contain prophecies that have come true,
Okay.
demonstrating a kind of foreknowledge that only a divine being could possess.
Right. So prophecies as a way of showing that there's this, divine plan in motion.
Yeah. That's the idea. And this all leads up to, I think, the most intriguing and potentially controversial aspect of their argument.
Okay.
These divinely appointed custodians.
Right. The folks who hold the keys to the kingdom, so to speak.
Exactly.
But how do they fit into all this? And how do they address at Muck's concerns about, ancient claims being used to justify present day actions?
Well, at Light of Reflection argues that these custodians are individuals specifically chosen either by the founder of the religion or, within the sacred texts themselves to interpret and safeguard the teachings.
So not just anyone can interpret the holy books.
Right.
There's a specific lineage of authority.
Exactly. And they believe that these custodians are not chosen based on worldly status or power,
Okay.
but rather through divine appointment, often marked by their exceptional knowledge and spiritual insight.
So they're like a living link to the original revelation, making sure the teachings are passed down accurately and protected from corruption.
Exactly.
Okay, I see where they're going with this. But wouldn't that mean that the vast majority of people who follow a particular faith might actually be on the wrong track
Right.
if they're not following these specific custodians?
That's exactly the point that At Light of Reflection makes.
Wow.
They apply this 9-step test to argue that the truest path lies within a small subset of Muslims who believe in the divinely appointed custodians of the Quran,
Okay.
the progeny of Prophet Muhammad.
So they're saying that even within a major world religion like Islam, only a tiny fraction of followers are truly adhering to the true path.
It might seem paradoxical, but that's their argument, and they use this really interesting analogy of counterfeit currency to illustrate this point.
Okay.
Just because there are many fake bills circulating doesn't mean that the real currency doesn't exist. In fact, the existence of the fakes actually highlights the value and authenticity of the real thing.
So they're saying that the prevalence of all these different interpretations, even corruptions of a faith, doesn't invalidate the existence of a true path.
Exactly. And this leads to another crucial aspect of their argument, this importance of intellectual honesty and resisting worldly desires.
Okay.
They suggest that those who cling to worldly power, wealth, fame, are more likely to distort the true message for their own benefit.
That's a pretty bold statement, especially considering how often religion and power have been intertwined throughout history.
It is, and it raises the question of how we can even discern between, genuine spiritual authority and those who might be using faith for their own agendas.
Right. Are we looking at the messenger or the message?
Exactly.
Yeah, it really is. It's like we've been handed this giant jigsaw puzzle
Right.
of faith and history and human interpretation, and we're just trying to, piece it together without even knowing what the final picture is supposed to look like.
Exactly. And like you said, some of the pieces might be missing,
Right.
or they might have been, altered over time, or maybe there are even fake pieces thrown in just to confuse us.
Yeah, and we're back to that counterfeit money analogy.
Right.
So how do we be tips they offer for navigating this complex landscape of faith and truth?
Absolutely. I think one of the key takeaways from their argument is this idea that we need to be wary of those who cling to worldly power and use faith for their own gain. It's a reminder to look beyond the surface, to question motives, and to be skeptical of those who present themselves as having all the answers.
So a healthy dose of skepticism, even when it comes to religious leaders or institutions.
Exactly. And it's not about being cynical or dismissive, but about engaging critically,
Right.
asking questions like, who benefits from this interpretation?
Right.
Or what are the potential biases at play here?
That's so important, especially in today's world where, you know, information and misinformation spreads so quickly.
Right.
We need to be able to think for ourselves
Right.
and not just blindly accept what we're told.
Absolutely. And another practical tip, I think, from A Light of Reflection is this emphasis on seeking out sources that have remained consistent over time.
Okay.
They argue that texts or traditions that have been preserved in their original form are more likely to contain those authentic teachings.
Right. So looking for that continuity, that unbroken chain we talked about earlier. But how can we even know for sure that something has remained unchanged over centuries?
Right.
Isn't there always room for interpretation and human error?
Well, that's where the critical thinking comes in again. It's about examining the historical context,
Right.
considering different perspectives and being aware of, the potential for bias or manipulation. It's not about blindly accepting a text or a tradition as perfect, but about engaging with it thoughtfully and critically.
So it sounds like what we're really talking about is a shift from passive belief to active seeking.
Yes.
It's not about just inheriting a set of beliefs,
Yeah.
but about embarking on a journey of personal exploration and discovery.